So most leaders know that they should document behavior, but very few feel confident doing it. And that gap right there, that is where the problems begin to grow and fester. So documentation doesn't fail because leaders are lazy or careless. It fails because the moment behavior turns messy or it becomes emotional or really uncomfortable, clarity begins to collapse. So leaders aren't dealing with policies in those moments, they're actually dealing with people. And the situation feels really personal, and the stakes feel very, very high. So the risk of getting it wrong feels enormous. So leaders therefore start to hesitate. And hesitation, guess what? It becomes the enemy of documentation. So let's have a real conversation about what it's like for leaders dealing with difficult people. So I'm Brenda Neckvatal, and I help the strongest leaders deal with the messiest people. Now, I used to avoid documentation too. Early in my career, I literally told myself that I would remember what happened. And I believed that my judgment would have been enough. So I thought. So what happened was is that documentation was something that you did when only things got bad. At least that's what I thought it was. And what I learned, and I learned it the hard way, is that waiting doesn't protect you. It actually weakens you. Because documentation isn't something you do at the end of a problem, it's something that prevents the problem from becoming unimaginable in the first place. So the problem starts with how leaders define documentation. They think it means writing someone up, and they think it signals escalation. And they also think that it turns a coaching moment into a legal event. Well, none of that is actually true. Documentation is not punishment, it's clarity. We don't penalize our people. Clarity is what leaders lose first when situations get emotional. So here's the familiar pattern. An issue comes up, you address it verbally, and the behavior improves briefly. You feel relieved, you move on, chuck it up to a victory, right? Then the behavior starts to creep back and it starts to return. Slightly different, maybe a little harder to name, easier to explain away. Now, you hesitate to write anything down because it feels minor or awkward or even premature, but you don't want to overreact. Meanwhile, the pattern continues. It's untracked, it's unresolved, and it's unanchored. And this is where dealing with difficult people starts to become a little dangerous because without documentation, behavior starts blending together. So leaders rely on their memory, and their memory, guess what? It's emotional. Memory softens over time, details start to fade, and then context gets lost. So what felt obvious in the moment becomes fuzzy later on. Then one day, you'll find that the situation demands action. Now it's serious, now it's disruptive, and now it's affecting the team. And suddenly, leaders are not prepared, nor do they feel prepared. Not because of the behavior is new, but because there's no record to anchor the behavior to. This is when leaders start second guessing themselves. Did it really happen that way? Am I overreacting now? And why didn't I address this sooner? That self-doubt isn't a leadership flaw, it is a documentation gap. And the team, believe it or not, will feel it too because they watch the same issues resurface without any consequence. They see standards applied inconsistently and they notice who gets corrected and who gets coached endlessly. So dynamics actually suffer because accountability now feels like it's selective. High performers, they start trusting the process, and not because the leaders don't care, but because nothing seems to stick. And in the absence of a documentation, like quietly erodes credibility. Credibility is the currency of leadership. Here's the shift that changed everything for me. Documentation is not about the employee, it's about me, the leader. It gives structure to chaos and it forces clarity when emotions are high. And it protects consistency over time. So once I reframed documentation as a leadership tool instead of a disciplinary weapon, everything started to change. Strong leaders document early and neutrally. They don't wait for certainty. They don't wait for escalation. They don't wait until frustration sets in. They capture observable behavior. Well, what happened, when it happened, what expectation was reinforced, that's it. No diagnosis, no assumptions, No editorializing. They don't write about attitude. They only write about action. They don't speculate about a person's intent. They document impact. And this is where leaders often get stuck. They think documentation has to sound formal or legal. Well, it doesn't. It just has to be accurate. Because documentation isn't about sounding smart. It's actually about being really clear. And when documentation is clear, the conversations change. There's less defensiveness, less arguing over memory, and less emotional debate because the record isn't personal, it's factual. So leaders often fear documentation damages trust. The opposite could not be more true, right? It's true when it's done correctly. Transparency is what builds trust. So when expectations are documented and reinforced consistently, toxic behavior has less room to hide. So people know the standard, they know the process, they know what gets addressed and what doesn't. And there are no surprises because surprises are what damages trust. Consistency is what actually builds it. And the real cost of avoiding documentation isn't administrative, it's actually strategic. Decisions will get delayed because leaders don't feel grounded. And authority will weaken because everything feels subjective. So leaders therefore hesitate because there's no clear trail on to rely on. So group dynamics, they'll start to drift because accountability starts to feel like a negotiation. And leaders end up carrying stress that documentation was designed to remove. So if documentation feels impossible, that discomfort is information. It's telling you the behavior matters more than you want to acknowledge. And the more emotionally charged the situation feels, the more important documentation becomes because emotion is a signal, not a stop sign. So your team is watching how you handle recurring behavior. They learn whether patterns are addressed or tolerated, and they learn whether expectations are real or optional. So culture forms around what leaders track and reinforce, not what they say in meetings. And this is why leaders can have strong values and still weak cultures. Values without documentation are aspirations, and documentation turns them into standards. So let's talk about what documentation isn't. It's not a novel, it's not a performance review, and it is by no means a legal brief. It's just a running log of reality. Short, neutral, consistent. And when leaders do this well, documentation stops feeling heavy. It actually becomes a habit, and habits are what reduces the stress. So this is exactly the reason why I built my app. Because I built it because leaders don't need more policy language. They need to support in real moments. Moments when something happens and they're not sure what to do with it yet. Moments when they want to capture behavior without escalating it. And moments when they want clarity without confrontation. So the app helps leaders document behavior in real time, and it guides you on what to note, what to leave out, and then also how to keep records clean, factual, and defensible. So documentation becomes something that you do as part of leadership, not something you scramble to recreate later. So if you're dealing with difficult people, toxic behavior, or even complex group dynamics, this matters way more than you think. And you can access the app at askbrendahow.com. Says documentation only feels impossible when leaders wait too long. So when you start early, it becomes one of the strongest tools you have. Not to punish, not to threaten, but to lead with clarity when things get messy, and leadership always gets messy. And the leaders who thrive, they're the ones who actually stay structured anyway.